I'm going to start with the verdict that was handed down. Joe Biden's son, Hunter
Yeah.
Biden, found guilty. First of all, I promised everyone that I would ask you: do you think he will actually do time?
Um, I don't know. I cannot say. Had Hunter Biden not sent an email that the government got off his electronics 2 days after the purchase of the gun, saying he was getting drugs, he might have had reasonable doubt because he'd just come out of a rehabilitation place. In alcoholic terms, he dried out. And so you could make an argument that, well, he felt he wasn't an addict anymore. He was clean. But if 2 days later, you're working with a drug dealer, that defense just doesn't work. Um, so I don't know. There's no accusation that he did anything with the gun. He only had it for 11 days. Uh, so I would be surprised if he gets a jail time, but he may.
And to the pardon, when asked about pardoning his son last week at the D-Day commemoration,
Yeah.
the president was, he's firm on it. No, not going to pardon him.
Well, Mark, here's the difference, a stark difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Donald Trump is calling the people who attacked our Capitol heroes and saying he's going to pardon them and saying he's going to immediately have the Trump Justice Department go after his enemies. Joe Biden says, my duty as president is to appoint the Attorney General of the United States and then to keep my hands off. If he's unhappy, he can fire the Attorney General, who serves at his pleasure. So, no, he's not going to pardon his son. And if his son goes to prison, even if it's manifestly unfair given the circumstances, he's not doing anything about it. You break the law, you take the risks that go with breaking the law. We had in Western New York some nuns protesting the nuclear missile silos near Syracuse a few years ago.
I remember that, yeah.
And they, to make a point, brought bolt cutters. I don't think they actually cut the padlock chain off the locks. Like this is how we protect our nuclear arsenal. It's also symbolic, stay away. But these were nuns. They actually got prison time. So he has a second trial coming up.
Right.
And the second trial is for income tax fraud. We only convict about 500 people a year. Remember, there's over 160 million individual tax returns. About 500 people a year, a tiny, tiny number of a primary tax charge. And of those, almost all of them are in one of three categories, especially the first two: drug dealers, politicians who take bribes, and then occasionally the business person who paid the bribe. And if you paid the taxes, and Hunter Biden has paid the taxes, the penalties, and the interest, nobody gets jail for that. So that's a case where I would be very surprised if he got jail time. But the gun charge, not so sure about that.
And now to these revelations around Alito and his wife. Tony, do you have I was just going to play it for everyone who might have missed it, just as a quick. This is the recording made of the Supreme Court Justice Alito, and his wife will follow. Lauren Windsor is someone who has essentially, she's a documentarian who begins these conversations and kind of, it would seem, you'll see that back and forth, but that's who Lauren Windsor is. Here we go. Go, Tony.
As a Catholic and as someone who really cherishes my faith, I don't know that we can negotiate with the left in the way that needs to happen for the polarization to end. I think that it's a matter of winning.
I think you're probably right. I think one side or the other is going to win. I don't know. I mean, there can be a way of working, a way of living together peacefully, but it's difficult, because there are differences on fundamental things that really can't be compromised. They really can't be compromised. So it's not like we're going to split the difference.
I think that the solution really is like winning the moral argument. Like, people in this country who believe in God have got to keep fighting for that, to return our country to a place of godliness.
Oh, I agree with you. I agree with you.
This is something that we've known. I mean, we've known how he feels about this. That this is sort of this is their religious jihad. The Christian right. Can you speak to this? I also wondered if you would touch on the way in which this recording was made. Whether you're okay with that.
Well, let's deal with the first part. Justice Roberts was essentially asked the same questions, and he gave a much more appropriate answer. Not as good an answer as I would like, but he said, no, that's not our job. If that's what you want, you go to the legislature. And by the way, lots of people in this country are Muslims and Jews. He didn't say non-believers or anything else. But he stayed in his lane, however imperfectly. Alito makes it very clear that he is a jihadist for the people who completely ahistorically think we're a Christian nation. I mean, our Constitution is very explicit that we're not a religion of any kind. And a number of the founding fathers were deists. That is, they believed this theory that, well, if there is a God, he wound the watch up and let it go. And they clearly were very against any state religion. We've already, I think, gone way too far in this country with that. And so Alito's testimony and the comments his wife made to this individual are deeply disturbing and revelatory that he has no respect for his oath of office. That should be our concern, that he disrespects his oath of office. And now we know that that's on top of lying. I mean, his whole story about his wife and the flags is so patently not true, especially with the reporting that's been done with the neighbors and what was going on. It's just not true. As to how the recording was obtained, I'm not a fan of undercover journalism as a general rule, but I'm not totally against it. I've done some on occasion, not a lot. But if you are a justice of the Supreme Court and you're speaking in anywhere, you should assume that you're being recorded. The fact that you are being recorded may make you socially uncomfortable and inhibit what you're going to say, but you should operate on that principle.
At minimum, that your comments are going to be repeated.
Yes. Yeah. People are going to say you said this or that. And we've had people do that. I have a friend who was invited to dinner once at the home of Chief Justice Berger. And he was absolutely dumbfounded that throughout the dinner, Justice Berger would say, now, ladies, now, gentlemen. And then the room divided and all the men went into another room and the women into a different room after the dinner for conversation. And he just was dumbfounded at the sort of 19th century and earlier social process that went on. But we had a real problem here. Now, we should also mention Clarence Thomas. There's a chart out there on the internet of all the gifts received by Supreme Court justices, and it's nothing, 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 line you can barely see, a very short little line. And then Thomas, $4 million that he's disclosed. God only knows how much the actual total is. And I don't understand, and I hope if there isn't, there should be a grand jury investigation of him. We don't need to impeach him. If the size of the gifts that he's taken, there should be some kind of quid pro quo evidence. But remember, the U.S. Supreme Court has virtually legalized bribing public officials, which would include Supreme Court justices, because in the McDonnell case, the governor of Virginia, who the governor and his wife got shopping sprees and Rolex watches and the use of a $400,000 or so very expensive sports car. And the Supreme Court said that, well, yes, the governor helped the business in many ways, but there was no absolute direct quid pro quo. I'll give you this money and you do this official act. Well, so now it's just a wink and a nod. And
there's the chart.
Yeah,
Thank Tony.
That's a great chart that MSNBC created. So even with what amounts to the legalization of bribing public officials, unless you're an idiot, unless you're so stupid as to say, well, add this bill or take this administrative action and here's the cash. Anything short of that is not a crime, the Supreme Court says. How about a rule that says if you're a justice of the United States Supreme Court, you may not receive any gift worth more than $100 and you have to disclose who you got it from immediately?
Sure. I mean, why not have the same transparency and demands that you put on other legislators who, occupy Capitol Hill?
Yeah.
He's now, I was just looking for the quote, but Thomas is now admitting that he should have released some of the information around these, the billionaire donors'
and so
gifts.
Thomas knowingly lied on these forms for years. He also has a tax issue here. Either he or Harlan Crow over the $267,000, what I call the bribe mobile. And
I love the branding.
Yeah. And, Sheldon Whitehouse, the senior senator from Rhode Island, has a great line, which is the highest court in the land shouldn't have the lowest ethics. Everybody is subject to ethics rules except the Supreme Court. The canons of judicial ethics, which I went and read when all this went up to refresh my memory, absolutely show that both Alito and Thomas, for the two different reasons, are not in compliance with the rules. And we shouldn't have to impeach to remove them. But what I expect will happen, once we get a significant majority, to put it in the terms of Justice Alito, once one side or the other wins, if the side that believes in the Constitution and freedom and liberty as opposed to the American Taliban side that he's on, if they win, we need to increase the Supreme Court to 13 or 15 judges, in part because Chief Justice Roberts says there's too much work for the court to do. We needed a lot more other federal judges. And we also need to pass absolute strict ethical conduct for justices. And a measure to remove them if that's the case.
You talked about this once before, but I wonder if you could just review. And it's funny, just as an aside, in the run-up to 2020, all you heard about is that the Democrats are going to stack the courts. Democrats are going to stack the courts. To me, it was so rich that they would make that argument, in the shadow of having just stacked the court. But what's involved in expanding the court?
That's just passing a piece of legislation. Yeah. The Supreme Court size is not set under the Constitution, and it can be whatever the Congress makes it to be. And I would argue that you don't want to go to 11 because, among other things, there are 13 inferior courts that need a supervising judge. Nobody should have to double up. So the court should be either 13, 15, or 17 members. I think 15 is the optimal number here. I had somebody on a different show, Mark, several years ago say, oh, my goodness, well, the Supreme Court building isn't big enough to house that many. And I went, gee, Washington, D.C., we can't do something because the building isn't big enough. There's a problem that's insolvable.
That's hilarious. So that would be used as an argument. It's an interesting state we're in where the media message is leading right now a lot of the polling, moving on from the Supreme Court. It's just one of those things that you see over and over again. The notion somehow that half the likely voters think that the stock market is down. Half the likely voters think that inflation is worse than when the Biden administration first took office. There are a lot of lies that are out there, promulgated largely by right-wing media, Fox News, just beating that drum, but they've been swallowed by a big part of the electorate, enough of the electorate anyway, to likely make this election unclear as to its outcome.
Well, and that's because we have outfits like Sinclair which are dedicated to being propaganda for Republicans. I would argue they're subject to a license challenge because they're not fulfilling the license requirement for their broadcast stations of serving the public interest, convenience, and necessity. And let me just digress on that issue. I'm the only journalist in American history who caused a broadcast chain to have to shut down and go out of business for violating its requirement to serve the public interest, convenience, and necessity, because they were putting up what today we call fake news. And so I have some experience in this area.
Wow.
If you're only watching places like Newsmax, Breitbart, and you believe they're the only source of truth, of course you believe these stupid things. I'm not sure how deep that goes. I mean, one of the things that pollsters release all their detail. And I have looked at a few of these polls, and I was primarily struck by the fact that when asked not, are you for Trump or for Biden, but related questions like how would a Trump criminal conviction affect you? A lot of Trump support slips away. Jennifer Rubin of the Washington Post, who is a lawyer, Stanford educated, and a conservative, an authentic, actual conservative, has an excellent column in today's Washington Post. I think it's outside the paywall, but because I'm a subscriber, I can't tell you for sure. It has a picture of my friend Danelle Morton's Trump chicken in the prison garb on the top. When Trump was holding his Predators ball in San Francisco, she raised just enough money to hire this boat. They inflated the chicken.
Oh yeah, it was prominently featured on this show on multiple days. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's all the genius of my a journalist I trained and have worked with and have known for
that's awesome.
almost 50 years. Danelle Morton, just fabulous reporter. And they're trying now to raise money to take the Trump chicken to the mall in front of the Capitol.
Oh, that's great.
And Trump cannot deal with any humor about himself. So everything possible to mock him will be smart.
Yeah, it does land with him, doesn't it, David Cay Johnston? It does land on him.
Yeah, and I think I'm not sure if I mentioned this on your show, but I mean, my sort of fantasy dream is that Trump actually comes to the debate, and Joe Biden drops to the floor and does one-arm push-ups like Jack Palance at the 1992 Oscars. And when Donald, of course, who couldn't do it, he can get back up, stand in front of the microphone and say, well, Donald, it's okay. You can use two arms. And hopefully it would illustrate to people, how Trump not only has no sense of humor, but he's in terrible physical shape.
Yeah, well, of course, that's true. And I don't know. There was a piece in the Post, I want to say, gosh, I can't remember now, that I thought was really quite good about how this focus on the focus on mental acuity is decent, but the notion somehow that Biden isn't up to the task is based completely, again, on, the first thing we were talking about, media. Media like somebody who gives them a quick repartee, has a quick turn of the phrase. It's as though we're auditioning for game show hosts instead of auditioning for someone who has an earnest interest in the briefings, who will review very complex and delicate balances internationally and domestically, and then help make decisions in a collaborative way. None of those things reflect Donald Trump. All of those things reflect Biden.
Right. And, somebody should make an advertisement that shows Trump as a boy in a schoolyard where he's being, given a hard time, bullied by some other boys. And he goes, boy, you're going to pay when I get to the White House. Because it's like, I'm sorry, you please elect me to the White House so I can go after my enemies.
Yeah, it's
what basis is that for voting for him? And if you believe, and there are people who clearly do, that Trump being our dictator would be a good thing, you just don't know anything about history. You don't know anything about what happens to dictators. All dictators ultimately have to start killing people around them to maintain power. Or as I put it, down that path lead firing squads. And given what Donald said, including that he hates me more than any other journalist, though I suspect he's probably said that of others as well, he gets back into power. he'll try to find some way to, at some point, arrest me. I may not be on day one, but
there's going to be a waiting list, David. I would not worry. There's going to be quite the waiting list. But look, I have 30 more. I'm actually over my time. All right. I love our time. When we come together next week, I'd love to ask you about the rise of the right in the world. It just seems as though it's a scary time, you know, and I think it's happening across
big
Europe.
Social force all around the world. I agree.
Yeah, we'll talk about it next time.
All right.
Look for David's stuff across, and you can look for David's face across the world of television. And I appreciate always our time, my friend. David Cay Johnston, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.